When the Halo was first announced and brought in for the 2018 season, it divided fans. You had the vast majority of people hating it purely on the basis it looked ugly, while others applauded it as a knee-jerk reaction to Jules Bianchi's unfortunate yet still avoidable accident. And then there was also the accidents that killed Henry Surtees and Justin Wilson through blunt force trauma to the head after being hit by large parts of another car. It's also bred a bunch of motorsport gamers crying that they can't see. And you had those F1 fans in the first couple of rounds of the 2018 season who, whenever a car as much went for a spin into the gravel, wrote the same tired "thank God the Halo saved him" comment over and over again. But at the 2018 Belgian Grand Prix, those comments stopped in an instant. If you don't remember, Hülkenberg didn't brake full of sauce and ploughed into the back of Alonso, who was then sent over the top of Leclerc's Sauber with a huge black tyre mark left on the Sauber's halo. If it hadn't been there, we'd have had a seriously injured, if not dead, driver. Ironically, Leclerc was protected by the thing that came in because of the death of his godfather. So fast forward to last year in Bahrain as Grosjean had his fiery crash in the desert. In this instance, the Halo helped push the arm coat away from the car, and given how that stuff is built, if the Halo hadn't been there, there's a chance that the bent metal would have been like a guillotine in a dose of turbo irony. And then we have the latest time a Halo was called into action, the 2021 Italian Grand Prix, when Max Verstappen's Red Bull ended up mounting Lewis Hamilton's Mercedes. Basically what happened is Verstappen went for a gap that barely existed, hit a sausage curb, and while out of control mounted Hamilton's Mercedes, with the right rear of the Red Bull coming down square on top of Hamilton's head. And we can debate the ins and outs of that accident all day every day, I mean I did it in my previous video. Either way, Hamilton was left with a sore neck and a bit of a headache, which is understandable, he had a car land on him. And the picture of Lewis's head being thrown forward as the wheel makes contact with his head will become one of F1's iconic photos when it comes to safety. It makes you wonder what would have happened if it hadn't been there. We'd be looking at compression that could have had Lewis out for the rest of the season and out of the title fight. We could have had a paralysed driver, or we could have had a dead driver, worst case scenario. And then the comment sections online would have been pretty eventful. Max wins the title as the result of an accident he was in killed or seriously injured the other championship contender, but you know, this isn't the alternate history hub. But after the pictures of the Halo doing its job went around the internet after the race, completely overshadowing the McLaren 1-2 and Russell points TM, there were more than a handful of comments left on those pictures containing the words Bianchi, Senna, Ratzenberger, and then would still be alive. But is that actually the case? And that's what I'm here to look at. So I'll look at the Jules Bianchi crash first because that's the accident that fast-tracked the Halo through. Now if you're new to Formula 1 or just forgotten the details, what happened is Bianchi went off the road in the pouring rain at Suzuka and hit the tractor that was in the process of recovering Adrian Sutil's Sauber. It was such a bizarre accident that the BBC commentary at the time hadn't noticed that he'd gone off the road. It was, oh, Bianchi's out? How did that happen? And we've seen a driver hit a tractor in a gravel trap before, the Nürburgring in 2007 when everybody went off at turn 1. As the tractor was coming out to recover the stranded cars, Liuzzi went flying in and hit the rear wheel of the tractor with his rear wing. Now Bianchi wasn't so lucky, he'd gone under the tractor with the roll hoop taking the brunt of the impact, so the Halo wouldn't have been in contact with the tractor at all. He'd also broadsided it from behind unless the angle of the amateur footage deceives me, and the footage is on YouTube but it's NSFW and quite shocking, so watch at your own discretion. Either way, what killed Bianchi was the sudden stopping force measured at 92 G or something in that region, and something that insane, which makes Kubica's 75 G impact at Canada in 2007 or Verstappen's 55 G or so at Silverstone look like a small bump in heavy traffic. But Bianchi wasn't killed through direct trauma to the head, which is what the Halo is designed to prevent. What happened is his brain got damaged in the sudden stop. The brain is a squishy organ. In a big crash, the head is violently whipped around and the brain is going to compress and stretch and move around. So it goes like this to this, and then it's got to come back out, but it's going to stretch beyond what it will take, and then it will go back to normal, and then maybe some more, equal opposite reaction Newtonian science stuff. I mean, I'm not a brain surgeon, nor am I a physicist, even though I have got an audio engineering degree. Put simply, if that happens too much, you get a concussion or concussion-like symptoms. Take it even further and you get burst blood vessels and just irreversible damage. So it makes it even more incredible how Kenny Brack survived his 214G shunt at Texas. And that's not me getting my numbers messed up as I often do in these videos, that's how heavy it was. It's the most amount of Gs that a human being has ever survived. Even just typing highest G load survived into Google will just return one picture, and it's of Kenny Brack. For reference, David Purley, I think, was the previous record holder. He survived 180G in a crash at the 1977 British Grand Prix. So no, the Halo would not have saved Bianchi. And this leads me on to Senna, which was a different cause of death: suspension arm to the head. The Halo is designed to deflect large objects like wheels, larger chunks of carbon fibre like front wings, rear wings and stuff like that. It's not designed to protect in accidents like Massa at Hungary in 2009, where he was, and I'm not going to beat around the bush here, shot in the head by a spring. In the case of the Massa accident, and we might as well cover this as well, it's just down to pure luck. The window of entry with the Halo is much smaller, so imagine firing a machine gun into an open garage door and then doing the same for a regular door. You're going to find more bullets in the garage than you are in the other building you just shot up. Disclaimer, please don't go around shooting at buildings. So like I say, for Massa it's just pure luck. The spring is either going to get deflected away from the car if it hits the top side of the Halo or the side of the Halo, and it's going to get deflected down if it hits the bottom side. At least if it hits the Halo, it's going to have some of the momentum taken out of it, so if it hits the helmet after, it probably won't go through, but there is the risk of it entering the torso if that's still exposed, but in theory, the actual injuries and things like that because of the speed are reduced. If that makes any sense. So with Senna it could have the same effect. The Halo deflects the suspension arm away from the cockpit or similar, or the direction of the arm is deflected into the cockpit and then glances off the side of Senna's helmet. Also in the case of the Senna crash, his head was slammed back against the headrest that caused fatal skull fractures, but it's not clear whether it was the suspension arm or the skull fractures that killed him. Either way, unlike Bianchi, Senna was killed through blunt force trauma to the head. So for Senna in the case of the suspension arm, yes, the Halo may have saved him, rather than would have saved him, but there's another piece of equipment that may have helped, and it certainly would have saved Roland Ratzenberger. And sadly, Ratzenberger is the one who gets overlooked on that weekend at Imola. Senna got all the column inches because he was the 3-time world champion and some regard him as the greatest of all time, and Barrichello's crash is often remembered because he was Senna's protege, and that's talked about a lot as well, even if Rubens himself doesn't remember it. Ratzenberger is just the other guy. But with Ratzenberger, it's like Bianchi. The Halo wouldn't have done anything. Ratzenberger was killed the same way that Bianchi was, through the sudden deceleration, but Bianchi had something that Ratzenberger didn't: the HANS device. The head and neck support device, or HANS, was, until the Halo came along, the piece of equipment that drivers relied on to save their lives most since the introduction of the seatbelt. Probably. But Formula 1 wasn't the first to adapt this piece of equipment. NASCAR had drivers using it before F1 did, but when NASCAR drivers were wearing one, it wasn't mandatory. Long story short is, what had been happening in NASCAR is that a string of drivers had all been killed because of the same type of injury: the basilar skull fracture. If you follow the channel for a while, you'll know I've talked about this injury before, and it's the same injury that killed Dale Earnhardt at Daytona in 2001. What happened was Earnhardt hit a concrete wall, and the whiplash he sustained as the head was snapped forward put so much stress on the occiput, which is the base of the skull, about here, and the skull separated from the base, like opening a can of beans. What happens in this case is, as the skull separates from the base, it snaps the brainstem as well, and that results in instant death. Instant. So to put into very grim viewing, Earnhardt and Ratzenberger were most likely dead before their cars came to a stop. And before Earnhardt's death, NASCAR and the creators of the HANS device were begging drivers to use this new piece of equipment, but Dale wasn't going to wear one, so no one else was going to wear one, and that's the way they thought. Dale even called it that damn noose because he was certain that thing was going to hang him in his own car rather than save him in the event of an accident. He even said, "I've got all my gear rigged up how I want it. I've crashed loads of times and I've never been hurt." Again, irony. So with regards to the Halo saving Roland, it wouldn't have done anything because nothing struck Roland's head. It was, like Bianchi, the sudden deceleration that whipped his head forward and effectively broke his neck. Senna, had he survived the suspension arm, would have most likely escaped the skull fractures if he'd been wearing one as well. Professor Sid Watkins wasn't certain what killed Senna, whether it was the skull fractures or the suspension arm, so even in 1994 as was, if Senna had survived the suspension arm, he most likely would have died of the skull fractures anyway, so there probably was no way he would have survived that accident at all. He would have needed at least the hands device. If there was an accident in 1994 that would have been nasty and would have been totally a non-issue with the Halo, it would have been Martin Brundle at Interlagos that year when he was hit in the head by Verstappen's Benetton. And in that case, it's a miracle how Brundle walked away from that at all, because those wheels are heavy, especially attached to something that's travelling at 120 miles an hour. I mean, that guy's been through a lot when you think about it. So there we have it, a look at some other accidents that have happened over the years and clearing up whether or not those drivers would have been saved thanks to the Halo. Are there other accidents that I've missed or accidents that you might want my opinion on? Let me know in the comments section. And while heading down, if you've learned something or found this interesting, like the video and why not subscribe with the bell on so you get all the latest from this channel. Massive thanks as ever to the patrons of this channel via Patreon, and if you wish to join them or just join in the Discord stuff, I'll leave all the links required in the description box for you. So until next time, I've been Millward. Have a great day wherever you are, and I'll see you all again soon for another video. So until then, goodbye.